caught up on my sleep, so I'm feeling a lot better. So, back to Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. We are going to be starting at the top of 265. In the end, they decided that they wouldn't say anything to Hagrid unless there was another attack, and as more and more days went by with no whisper from the disembodied voice, they became hopeful that they would never need to talk to him about why he'd been expelled. It was now nearly 4 months since Justin and Nearly Headless Nick had been petrified, and nearly everyone seemed to think that the attacker, whoever it was, had retired for good. Peeves finally got bored of his "Oh, Potter, you rotter" song, and Ernie Macmillan asked Harry quite politely to pass a bucket of leaping toadstools in herbology one day, and in March several of the mandrakes threw a loud and raucous party in the Greenhouse 3. This made Professor Sprout very happy. The moment they start trying to move into each other's pots, we'll know they're fully mature, she told Harry. Then we'll be able to revive those people in the hospital wing. The second years were giving something new to think about during the Easter holiday. The time had come to choose their subjects for the third year, a matter that Hermione, at least, took very seriously. It could affect her whole future, she told Harry and Ron as they pored over a list of new subjects, marking them with ticks. I just want to give up potions, said Harry. We can't, said Ron gloomingly. We keep all our old subjects, or I've ditched defense against the dark arts. But that's very important, said Hermione, shocked. Not the way Lockhart teaches it, said Ron. I haven't learned anything from him except not to set pixies loose. Neville Longbottom had been sent letters from all the witches and wizards in his family, all giving him different advice on what to choose. Confused and worried, he sat reading the subject list with his tongue poking out, asking people whether they thought archomancy sounded more difficult than the study of ancient runes. Dean Thomas, who like Harry had grown up with muggles, ended up closing his eyes and jabbing his wand at the list, then picking the subjects it landed on. Hermione took nobody's advice, but signed up for everything. Harry smiled grimly to himself at the thought of what Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia would say if he tried to discuss his career in wizardry with them. Not that he didn't get any guidance. Percy Weasley was eager to share his experience. Depends on where you want to go, Harry, he said. It's never too early to think about the future, so I'd recommend divination. People say Muggle study is a soft option, but I personally think wizards should have a thorough understanding of the non-magical community, particularly if they're thinking of working in close contact with them. Look at my father. He has to deal with the Muggle business all the time. My brother Charlie was always more of an outdoor type, so he went for care of magical creatures. Play to your strengths, Harry. But the only thing Harry felt he was really good at was Quidditch. In the end, he chose the same new subjects as Ron, feeling that if he was rubbish at them, he'd at least have someone friendly to help him. Gryffindor's next Quidditch match would be against Hufflepuff, and Wood was insisting on team practices every night after dinner, so that Harry barely had time for anything but Quidditch and homework. However, the training sessions were getting better, or at least drier. In the evening before Saturday's match, he went up to his dormitory to drop off his broomstick, feeling Gryffindor's chances for the Quidditch Cup had never been better. But his cheerful mood didn't last long. At the top of the stairs to the dormitory, he met Neville Longbottom, who was looking frantic. Harry, I don't know who did it. I just found... Watching Harry fearfully, Neville pushed open the door. The contents of Harry's trunk had been thrown everywhere. His cloak lay ripped open on the floor. The bedclothes had been pulled off his four-poster, and the drawer had been closed out of his bedside, and a drawer had been pulled out of his bedside cabinet. The contents strewn over the mattress. Harry walked over to the bed, open-mouthed, treading on a few loose pages of Travels with Trolls. As he and Neville pulled the blankets back into his bed, Ron, Dean, and Seamus came in. Dean swore loudly. What happened, Harry? No idea, said Harry, but Ron was examining Harry's robes. All of his pockets were hanging out. Someone's been looking for something, said Ron. Is there anything missing? Harry started to pick up all the things and throw them into his trunk. It was only as he threw the last item of the Lockhart books back into it that he realized what wasn't there. Riddle's diary's gone, he said in an undertone to Ron. What? Harry jerked his head towards the dormitory door and followed Ron out. They hurried back down the Gryffindor corridor room. which was half empty, and joined Hermione, who was sitting alone reading a book called Ancient Runes Made Easy. Hermione looked almost aghast at the news, but only a Gryffindor could have stolen. Nobody else knows the password exactly, said Harry. They woke next day to brilliant sunshine and a light, refreshing breeze. Perfect Quidditch conditions, said Wood enthusiastically at the Gryffindor table. Loading the team's plates with scrambled eggs. Harry, buck up there. You need a decent breakfast. Harry had been staring down at the packed Gryffindor table, wondering if the new owner of Riddle's diary was right in front of his eyes. Hermione had been urging him to report the robbery, but Harry didn't like the idea. He'd have to tell a teacher all about the diary and how many people knew why Hagrid had been expelled 50 years ago. He didn't want to be the one who brought it all up again. As they left the Great Hall with Ron and Hermione to go to collect his Quidditch things, another very serious worry was added to Harry's growing mind. He had just set foot on the marble staircase when he heard it yet again. Kill this time. Let me rip, tear. He shouted loud, and Ron and Hermione both jumped away from him in alarm. The voice, said Harry, looking over his shoulder. I just heard it again, didn't you? Ron shook his head, wide-eyed. Hermione, however, clapped a hand over her forehead. Harry, I think I've just understood something. I've got to go to the library. As she sprinted away up the stairs. What does she understand? Said Harry, distractedly still looking around, trying to tell where the voice had come from. Loads more than I do, said Ron, shaking his head. But why she's got to go to the library? Because that's what Hermione does, said Ron, shrugging. When in doubt, go to the library. Harry stood irresolute, trying to catch the voice again, but people were now emerging from the Great Hall behind him, talking loudly, exiting through the front doors on the way to the Quidditch pitch. You better get moving, said Ron. It's nearly 11. The match. Harry raced up Gryffindor Tower, collected the Nimbus 2000, and joined the large crowd swarming across the grounds, but his mind was still in the castle, along with the bodiless voice. As he pulled on his scarlet robes in the changing room, his only comfort was that everyone was now outside to watch the game. The teams walked onto the pitch to tremendous applause. Oliver Wood took off for the warm-up flight around the goalpost. Madam Hooch released the balls. The Hufflepuffs, who played in the Canary Yellow, were standing in a huddle, having a last-minute discussion of tactics. Harry was just mounting his broom when Professor McGonagall came half marching, half running across the pitch, carrying an enormous purple microphone. Harry's heart dropped like a stone. This match has been canceled, Professor McGonagall called through the megaphone. Addressing the packed stadiums, there were boos and shouts. Oliver Wood, looking devastated, landed and ran toward Professor McGonagall without getting off his broomstick. But Professor, he shouted, we've got to play. The cup, Gryffindor. Professor McGonagall ignored him and continued to shout through the megaphone. All students are to make their way back to their house common rooms, where the heads of houses will give them further information as quickly as you can, please. Then she lowered the megaphone and beckoned Harry over to her. Potter, I think you better come with me. Wondering how she could possibly suspect him this time, Harry saw Ron detach himself from the complaining crowd. He was running up to them as they set off towards the castle. To Harry's surprise, Professor McGonagall didn't object. Yes, perhaps you'd better come too, Weasley. Some of the students swarming around them were grumbling about the match being canceled, and others looked worried. Harry and Ron followed Professor McGonagall back into the middle and up into the school and up the marble staircase, but they weren't taken to anybody's office this time. This will be a bit of a shock, said Professor McGonagall in a surprisingly gentle voice as they approached the hospital wing. There's been another attack. Another double attack. Harry's insides did a terrible somersault. Professor McGonagall pushed the door open, and he and Ron entered. Madame Pomfrey was bending over a 6-year girl with long curly hair. Harry recognized her as the Ravenclaw they'd accidentally asked for directions to the Slytherin common room, and on the bed next to her was Hermione. Ron groaned. Hermione lay utterly still, her eyes open and glassy. They were found near the library, said Professor McGonagall. I don't suppose either of you can explain this. It was on the floor next to them. She was holding up a small circular mirror. Harry and Ron shook their heads, both staring at Hermione. I will escort you back to Gryffindor Tower, said Professor McGonagall heavily. I need to address the students in any case. All students will return to their house common rooms by 6 o'clock in the evening. No student is to leave the dormitories after that time. You'll be escorted to each lesson by a teacher. No student is to use the bathroom unaccompanied by a teacher. All further Quidditch training and matches are to be postponed. There will be no more evening activities. The Gryffindors packed inside the common room listened to Professor McGonagall in silence. She rolled up the parchment which she had been reading and said in a somewhat choked voice, "I need hardly add that I have rarely been so distressed. It is likely that the school will be closed unless the culprit behind these attacks is caught. I would urge anyone who thinks they might know anything about them to come forward." She climbed somewhat awkwardly out of the portrait hole, and the Gryffindors began talking immediately. "That's 2 Gryffindors down, not counting a Gryffindor ghost. 1 Ravenclaw and 1 Hufflepuff," said the Weasley twins. Friend Lee Jordan, counting on his fingers. Haven't any of the teachers noticed that the Slytherins are all safe? Isn't it obvious all the stuff's coming from Slytherin? The heir of Slytherin, the monster of Slytherin? Why don't they just chuck out all the Slytherins?" He roared to nods and scattering applause. Percy Weasley was sitting in the chair behind Lee, but for once he didn't seem keen to make his views heard. He was looking pale and stunned. "Percy's in shock," George told Harry quietly. "That Ravenclaw girl, Penelope Clearwater, she's a prefect. I don't think that the monster would dare attack a prefect." But Harry was only half listening. He didn't seem to be able to get rid of the picture of Hermione laying on the hospital bed, as though carved out of stone, and if the culprit wasn't caught soon, he was looking at a lifetime back with the Dursleys. Tom Riddle had turned Hagrid in because he was faced with the prospect of a Muggle orphanage if the school closed. Harry now knew exactly how he had felt. "What are we going to do?" said Ron quietly in Harry's ear. "Do you think that they suspect Hagrid?" "We've got to go and talk to him," said Harry, making up his mind. "I can't believe it's him this time, but if he set the monster loose last time, he'll know how to get it inside the Chamber of Secrets, and that's a start. But McGonagall said that we've got to stay in the tower unless we're in class." "I think," said Harry more quietly still, "it's time to get my dad's old cloak out again." Harry had inherited just one thing from his father, a long and silvery invisibility cloak. It was the only chance of sneaking out of the school to visit Hagrid without anyone knowing it. They went to bed at the usual time, waited until Neville, Dean, and Seamus had stopped discussing the Chamber of Secrets and finally fallen asleep, then got up, dressed again, and threw the cloak over themselves. The journey through the dark and deserted castle corridors wasn't enjoyable. Harry, who had wandered the castle at night several times before, had never seen it so crowded after sunset. Teachers, prefects, and ghosts were marching the corridors in pairs, staring around for any unusual activity. Their invisibility cloak didn't stop them from making any noise, and there was a particularly tense moment when Ron stubbed his toe only yards from the spot where Snape was standing guard. Thankfully, Snape sneezed at almost the exact moment Ron swore. It was with relief that they reached the oak front doors and eased them open. It was a clear, starry night, and they hurried towards the lightened windows of Hagrid's house and pulled off the cloak only when they were right outside his front door. Seconds after they had knocked, Hagrid flung it open. They found themselves face to face with him, aiming a crossbow at them, Fang, the boarhound, barking loudly behind him. "Oh," he said, lowering the weapon and staring at them. "What are you two doing here?" "What's that for?" said Harry, pointing at the crossbow as they stepped inside. Nothing, muttered Hagrid. "I've been expecting. Doesn't matter. Sit down. I'll make tea." Harry hardly seemed to know what he was doing. He nearly extinguished the fire, spilling water from the kettle on it, and then smashed the teapot with a nervous jerk of his massive hand. "Are you okay, Hagrid?" said Harry. "Did you hear about Hermione?" "Oh, I heard all right," said Hagrid, a slight break in his voice. He kept glancing nervously at the windows, and he poured them both large mugs of boiling water, and he'd forgotten to add tea bags. And was just putting a slab of fruitcake on the plate when there was a loud knock at the door. Hagrid dropped the fruitcake. Harry and Ron exchanged panic-stricken looks, then threw the invisibility cloak back over themselves and retreated into the corner. Hagrid checked to see that they were hidden, seized his crossbow, and flung open the door once more. "Good evening, Hagrid." It was Dumbledore. He entered looking deadly serious, and was followed by a second very odd-looking man. The stranger was a short, portly man with rumpled gray hair and an anxious expression. He was wearing a strange mixture of clothes, a pinstripe suit, a scarlet tie, and a black cloak, and pointed purple boots. Under his arm he carried a lime green bowler. "That's Dad's boss," Ron breathed. "Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic." Hagrid elbowed Ron hard to make him shut up. Hagrid had gone pale and sweaty. He dropped into one of the chairs and looked from Dumbledore to Cornelius Fudge. "Bad business," Hagrid said Fudge in rather clipped tones. "Very bad business. Had to come. 4 attacks on Muggleborns? Things have gone far enough. The ministry's got to act. I never, said Hagrid, looking imploringly at Dumbledore. You know I never, Professor Dumbledore, sir. I want it understand, Cornelius, that Hagrid has my full confidence, said Dumbledore. Or I want it understood, Cornelius, that Hagrid has my full confidence, said Dumbledore, looking at Fudge. Look, Albus, said Fudge uncomfortably. Hagrid's record's against him. Ministry's got to do something. The school governors have been in touch. Yet again, Cornelius, I tell you that taking Hagrid away will not help in the slightest, said Dumbledore. But his blue eyes were full of fire Harry had never seen before. Look at it from my point of view, said Fudge, fidgeting with his Valor. I'm under a lot of pressure. Got to be seen to be doing something. If it turns out it wasn't Hagrid, he'll be back and no more said. But I've got to take him. Got to. Wouldn't be doing my duty. Take me, said Hagrid, who was trembling. Take me where? For a short stench only, said Fudge, not meeting Hagrid's eyes. Not a punishment, Hagrid, more of a precaution. If someone else is caught, you'll be let out with a full apology. Not Azkaban, croaked Hagrid. Before Fudge could answer, there was another loud rap on the door. Dumbledore answered it. It was Harry's turn to for an elbow in the ribs. He let an audible gasp. Mr. Lucius Malfoy strode into Hagrid's hut, swathed in a long black traveling cloak. Smiling a cold and satisfied smile, Fang started to growl. Already here, Fudge, he said approvingly. Good, good. What are you doing here? Said Hagrid furiously. Get out of my house. My dear man, please believe me, I have no pleasure at all in being outside your, do you call this a house? Said Lucius Malfoy, sneering as he looked around the small cabin. I simply called at the school and was told that the headmaster was here. And what exactly do you want me to do, Lucius? Said Dumbledore. He spoke politely, but the fire was still blazing in his blue eyes. Dreadful thing, Dumbledore, said Mr. Malfoy lazily, taking out a long roll of parchment. But the governors feel it's time for you to step aside. This is an order of suspension. You'll find all 12 signatures on it. I'm afraid we feel you're losing your touch. How many attacks have there been now? 2 more this morning, wasn't it? At this rate, there'll be no Muggle-borns left at Hogwarts, and we all know what an awful loss that would be for the school. Oh, now see here, Lucius, said Fudge, looking alarmed. Dumbledore suspended. No. The last thing we want just now. The appointment or suspension of the headmaster is a matter of the governors, Fudge, said Mr. Malfoy smoothly, and as Dumbledore failed to stop these attacks. Now, look, Lucius, if Dumbledore can't stop them, said Fudge, whose upper lips was sweating now, I mean to say, who can? But that remains to be seen, said Mr. Malfoy with a nasty smile, but all 12 of us have voted. Hagrid leapt to his feet, his shaggy black beard grazing the ceiling. And now, how many of you did you threaten and blackmail before they agreed, Malfoy? He roared. Dear, you know. That temper of yours will lead you into trouble one of these days, Hagrid, said Mr. Malfoy. I would advise you not to shout at the Azkaban guards like that. They won't like it at all. Yeah, you can't take Dumbledore, yelled Hagrid, making Fang the boarhound cower and whimper in his basket. Take him away, and the Muggle-borns won't stand a chance. They'll be killings next. Calm yourself, Hagrid, said Dumbledore sharply. He looked at Lucius Malfoy. If the governors want my removal, Lucius, then I shall, of course, step aside. But, stuttered Fudge. No, growled Hagrid. Dumbledore had not taken his bright blue eyes off Lucius Malfoy's cold gray eyes. However, said Dumbledore, speaking very slowly and clearly, so that none of them could miss a word, you will find that I will only truly have left the school when none here are loyal to me. You will also find that help will always be given at Hogwarts for those who choose to ask for it. For a second, Harry was almost sure Dumbledore's eyes flickered towards the corner where he and Ron stood hidden. Admirable sentiments, said Malfoy, bowing. We shall all miss your highly individual way of running things, Albus, and only hope that your successor will manage to prevent any killings. He strode to the cabin door, opened it, and bowed Dumbledore out. Fudge, fiddling with his Valor, waited for Hagrid to go ahead of him, but Hagrid stood his ground, took a deep breath, and said carefully, if anyone wanted to find out some stuff, all they'd have to do is follow the spiders. That'll lead 'em right. That's all I'm saying. Fudge stared in amazement. All right, I'm coming, said Hagrid, pulling on his moleskin overcoat. But as he was about to follow Fudge through the door, he stopped again and said loudly, and someone will need to feed Fang while I'm away. The door banged shut, and Ron pulled the invisibility cloak off. We're in trouble now, he said hoarsely. No, Dumbledore. No, Dumbledore. They might as well have closed the school tonight. There'll be an attack every day with him gone. Fang started howling, scratching at the door. Chapter 15. Aragog. Summer was creeping over the grounds around the castle sky, and a lake turned periwinkle blue, and flowers large as cabbages burst into bloom in the greenhouse. But with no Hagrid visible from the castle windows, striding the grounds with Fang at his heels, the scene didn't look right to Harry, no better, in fact, than the inside of the castle where things were so horribly wrong. Harry and Ron had tried to visit Hermione, but visitors were now barred from the hospital wing. We're taking no more chances, Madame Pomfrey told them severely through a crack in the hospital door. No, I'm sorry. There's every chance the attacker might come back to finish these people off. With Dumbledore gone, fear had spread as never before, so the sun warming the castle walls outside seemed to stop at the mullioned windows. There was barely a face to be seen in the school that didn't look worried and tense, and any laughter that rang through the corridors sounded shrill and unnatural and was quickly stifled. Harry constantly repeated Dumbledore's final words to himself. I will only truly have left the school when none here are loyal to me. Help will be always given at Hogwarts to those who ask. But what good were these words? Who exactly were they supposed to ask for help? When everyone was just as confused and scared as they were, Hagrid's hint about the spiders was far easier to understand. The trouble was, there didn't seem to be a single spider left in the castle to follow. Harry looked everywhere he went, helped rather reluctantly by Ron. They were hampered, of course, by the fact that they weren't allowed to wander off on their own, but had to move around the castle in a pack with the other Gryffindors. Most of the fellow students seemed glad that they were being shepherded from class to class by teachers, but Harry found it very irksome. One person, however, seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the atmosphere and terror and suspension. Draco Malfoy was strutting around the school as though he had just been appointed head boy. Harry didn't realize that he was so pleased until the potions lessons about a fortnight after Dumbledore and Hagrid had left, when, sitting right beside them, right behind Malfoy, Harry overheard him gloating to Grabble and Goyle. I always thought Father might be the one who got rid of Dumbledore, he said, not troubling to keep his voice down. I told you he thinks Dumbledore's the worst headmaster the school's ever had. Maybe we'll get a decent headmaster now. Someone who won't want the Chamber of Secrets closed. McGonagall won't last long, she's only filling in. Snape swept past Harry, making no comment about Hermione's empty seat in Cauldron. Sir, said Malfoy loudly, sir, why don't you apply for the headmaster job? Now, Malfoy, said Snape, though he couldn't suppress a thin-lipped smile. Professor Dumbledore's only been suspended by the governors. I dare say he'll be back with us soon enough. Yeah, right, said Malfoy, smirking. I expect you'd have Father's vote, sir. If you wanted to apply for the job, I'll tell Father you're the best teacher here, sir. Snape smirked as he swept off and around the dungeon, fortunately not spotting Seamus Finnegan, who was pretending to vomit into his cauldron. I'm quite surprised the mudbloods haven't all packed up their bags by now, Malfoy went on. Bet you 5 galleons the next one dies. Pity it wasn't Granger. The bell rang at that moment, which was lucky. At Malfoy's last words, Ron had leapt off his stool, and in a scramble to collect bags and books, his attempts to reach Malfoy went unnoticed. Let me at him, Ron growled as Harry and Dean hung onto his arms. I don't care. I don't need my wand. I'm going to kill him with my bare hands. Hurry up. I've got to take you all to herbology, barked Snape over the class's heads. Off they went, crocodile fashion, with Harry and Ron and Dean bringing up the rear. Still, Ron still trying to get loose. It was only safe to let go of him when Snape had seen them out of the castle, and they were making their way across the vegetable patch towards the greenhouses. The herbology class was very subdued, and there were now 2 missing students from their number, Justin and Hermione. Professor Sprout sent them all to work pruning the Abyssine shrivel figs. Harry went to tip an armful of withered stalks onto the compost heap and found himself face to face with Ernie Macmillan. Ernie took a deep breath and said very normally, I just want to say, Harry, that I'm sorry I ever suspected you. I know you'd never attack Hermione Granger, and I apologize for all the stuff I said. We're in the same boat now, and well, He held out a pudgy hand, and Harry shook it. Ernie and his friend Hannah came to work at the same shrivel fig as Harry and Ron. That Draco Malfoy character, said Ernie, breaking off dead twigs. He seems to be very pleased about all this, doesn't he? Do you know, I think he might be Slytherin's heir. That's very clever of you, said Ron, who didn't seem to have forgiven Ernie as readily as Harry. Do you think it's Malfoy? Ernie asked. No, Harry said firmly, so firmly that Ernie and Hannah stared. A second later, Harry spotted something that made him hit Ron over the head with the pruning shears. Ouch! What are you? Harry was pointing at the ground a few feet away. Several large spiders were scurrying across the earth. Oh yeah, said Ron, trying and failing to look pleased, but we can't follow them now. Ernie and Hannah were listening curiously. Harry watched the spiders running away. Looks like they're headed for the Forbidden Forest, and Ron looked even unhappier about that. At the end of the lesson, Professor Sprout escorted the class to their Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson, and Harry and Ron lagged behind the others so that they could talk out of earshot. We'll have to use the invisibility cloak again, Harry told Ron. We can't take Fang with us. He's used to going into the forest with Hagrid. He might be some help. Right, said Ron, who was twirling his wand nervously in his fingers. Aren't there supposed to be werewolves in the forest? He added. And as they looked at their usual places at the back of Lockhart's classroom, preferring not to answer the question, Harry said, "There are good things in there too. The Centaurs are all right, and the unicorns." Ron had never been into the Forbidden Forest before. Harry had entered it only once, and he had hoped never to do so again. Lockhart bounded into the room, and the class stared at him. Every other teacher in the place was looking grimmer than usual, but Lockhart appeared nothing short of buoyant. "Come now," he screamed, beaming all around him. "Why all the long faces?" People swapped exasperated looks, but nobody answered. Don't you people realize," said Lockhart, speaking slowly as though they were all a bit dim, "the danger is past. The culprit has been taken away." "Says who?" said Dean Thomas loudly. "My dear young man, the Ministry of Magic wouldn't have taken Hagrid if there hadn't been 100% sure that he was guilty," said Lockhart in a tone of somewhat explaining that one and one made two. "Oh, yes, he would," said Ron, even more loudly than Dean. "I flatter myself I know a touch more about Hagrid's arrest than you do, Mr. Weasley," said Lockhart in a self-satisfied tone. Ron started to say that he didn't think so, somehow, but stopped in mid-sentence when Harry kicked him hard under the desk. "We weren't there, remember," Harry muttered, but Lockhart's disgusting cheeriness that hints that he had always thought Hagrid was no good. His confidence that the whole business was now at an end irritated Harry so much he yearned to throw gadding with ghouls right in Lockhart's stupid face. Instead, he contented himself with scrawling a note to Ron. "Let's do it tonight." Ron read the message, swallowed hard, and looked sideways at the empty seat usually filled by Hermione. The sight seemed to stiffen his resolve, and he nodded. The Gryffindor common room was always very crowded these days because from 6 o'clock onwards the Gryffindors had nowhere else to go. There had been plenty to talk about, with the result of the common room often didn't empty past midnight. Harry went to get the invisibility cloak out of his trunk right after dinner and spent the evening sitting on it, waiting for the room to clear. Fred and George challenged Harry and Ron to a few games of Exploding Snap, and Ginny sat watching them, very subdued in Hermione's usual chair. Harry and Ron kept losing on purpose, trying to finish the games quickly, but even so, it was well past midnight when Fred and George and Ginny finally went off to bed. Ron and Harry waited for the distant sounds of the 2 dormitory doors closing before seizing the cloak, throwing it over themselves, and climbing through the portrait hole. It was another difficult journey through the castle, dodging all the teachers. At least they reached the entrance hall, slid back the door of the oak front door, squeezed between them, and trying to stop any creaking, stepped into the moonlight grounds. "Of course," said Ron abruptly as they strode across the black grass, "we might get to the forest and find there's nothing at all to follow. The spiders might not have been going there at all. I know it looked like we were moving in that sort of general direction," but his voice tailed away hopefully. They reached Hagrid's house, and sad and sorry looking with its blank windows, when Harry pushed the door open, Fang went mad with joy at the sight of them, worried he might wake everyone in the castle with his deep, booming barks. They hastily fed him trickle fudge from the tin on the mantelpiece, which glued his teeth together. Harry left the invisibility cloak on Hagrid's table, but there would be no more need for it in the pitch-dark forest. "Come on, Fang, we're going for a walk," said Harry, patting his leg, and Fang bounded happily out of the house behind them, dashed to the edge of the forest, and lifted his leg against a large sycamore tree. Harry took out his wand and muttered "Lumos," and a tiny light appeared at the end of it, just enough to let them watch the path for signs of spiders. "Good thinking," said Ron. "I'd like mine too, but, it'd probably blow up or something." Harry tapped Ron on the shoulder, pointing at the grass. 2 solitary spiders were hurrying along the wand light into the shade of trees. "Okay," Ron sighed, as though resigned to the worst. "I'm ready. Let's go." So with Fang scampering around them, sniffing tree roots and leaves, they entered the forest. By the glow of Harry's wand, they followed the steady trickle of spiders moving along the path. They walked about 20 minutes, not speaking, listening hard for noises, other than breaking twigs and rustling leaves. Then, when the trees had become thicker than ever, so the stars overhead were no longer visible, and Harry's wand shone alone in the sea of dark, they saw the spider guides leaving the path. That's where we'll stop today, and I will pick it up tomorrow. I love you guys. I hope that you're doing well, and I will see you soon. Bye-bye.